The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon, interrupting my thoughts and flooding my heart with an inexplicable apprehension. I knew that when my mother called, it wasn't for trivial conversation but to announce something that would change my life. I answered with a controlled voice, trying to hide the unease that was building in my chest. Her voice, always so sweet and welcoming, today sounded laden with an excessive joy, a joy that reminded me of the moments when painful secrets hid behind forced smiles. "Dear, I need you to come to the house today," she announced without hesitation. There was a tone of urgency mixed with something I couldn't decipher. I recalled previous occasions, especially the time when she had used a similar tone to reveal that my brother Nathan had taken out a loan in my name. That day, every word from him struck like a blow, tearing apart the trust one had always placed in our family. Today that same feeling enveloped me and I knew that something far more serious was about to happen. Before we continue with the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It is very important to us. Thank you very much. I took a deep breath and even with my heart racing, I replied almost automatically. "All right. I'll be there in an hour." As I drove to my parents' house, every kilometer seemed to heighten the tension. My memories mingled with doubts about what awaited me. When I parked, I immediately noticed that something was out of the ordinary. In the garage, a luxury car rested, gleaming under the dim light of the late afternoon, completely contrasting with the simplicity of our home. Next to it stood a well-dressed woman with a cold, calculating look, holding a folder of documents that seemed to have been handpicked to mark the beginning of an irreversible outcome. The air grew heavy and my senses sharpened. Every detail of that scene told me that the family routine was about to be broken definitively. Upon entering the house, I was immediately enveloped by a disconcerting silence. My parents were already waiting for me in the living room, their expressions mixing surprise with a strange sense of satisfaction. Their gestures, meticulously rehearsed, resembled a performance in which every word was carefully calculated. "You have 30 days to disappear. The house has been sold," they declared as if announcing a routine bureaucratic decision. For a moment I felt as if time had frozen. Every word seared into my mind, provoking a sensation of despair mixed with disbelief. I knew that that house was not merely a property. It was the home my grandfather had built with his calloused hands, with so much love and sweat. It was where I learned to walk, to dream, and where I heard stories that exalted the importance of hard work and family legacy. As my eyes scanned the room, pain and anger merged into a whirlwind of emotions. My mother, with a forced smile, tried to convey a calm I could not feel. My father, with his arms crossed, displayed a posture of someone who felt freed from a burden that had long suffocated him. And then, as if it were the prelude to an already written tragedy, my brother Nathan appeared in the doorway, with a presumptuous smile and an expression overflowing with disdain. "Relax, Chloe. You're always traveling for work. You hardly even stay here. Besides, you're not married, you have no kids. What difference does it make for you?" he mocked, treating me as if I were an obstacle amidst much larger plans. His words sounded like a cold blade cutting the little dignity I had left. I felt my blood boil, but at that moment I knew I couldn't let my feelings explode. Restraint was necessary. Every gesture had to be calculated so that, in the end, I could turn the tables. For years, I had been treated as a disposable piece in this family mechanism that only valued profits and individual interests. However, there was a secret I had guarded with utmost care, something that my grandfather had confided to me long ago and that I had never allowed my parents to know. Shortly before he passed away, he called me for an intimate conversation, away from judging eyes and financial pressures, and held my hand with a firmness that conveyed both strength and affection. "Chloe, listen carefully," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "This house, it is yours." With those words, he placed an old envelope in my hands, yellowed by time yet imbued with an inestimable value, the original deed registered in my name. In that exact moment, while my parents and Nathan rejoiced at the idea of having made an irreversible decision, I smiled inwardly. I knew that the truth always finds its way, and that my grandfather's legacy would not be usurped so easily. The tension in that environment intensified with every passing second. Every glance, every gesture, seemed to announce the start of an inevitable confrontation. While my parents celebrated what they believed to be the conclusion of a perfect plan, I felt the flame of justice growing within me. It wasn't just a material matter. It was about preserving a memory, A legacy of love and sacrifice that couldn't be reduced to mere numbers or malicious contracts. As the afternoon transformed into twilight, the surroundings took on golden hues and elongated shadows, symbolizing the duality of that moment, the light of the past and the darkness of a treacherous present. My gaze fixed on every detail, the walls that held secrets of laughter and tears, the scent of aged wood permeating the air, and the faces now bowing before a truth they tried to ignore. I knew that the true battle was only beginning. Every unspoken word, every hidden action, culminated in that very instant. My determination strengthened with each heartbeat, while the weight of betrayal transformed into the force to reverse fate. And with the envelope firmly in hand, I felt that the scales of justice were beginning to tip in my favor. There was no room left for doubt or hesitation. The house, our home, had ceased to be a mere material asset and had become the symbol of everything I had lost and was now ready to reclaim. There, between the light of the evening and the shadows of the past, I prepared to confront the betrayal of my own family with the serenity and conviction of someone who carries within the true meaning of a legacy. While my parents attempted to shape a flimsy excuse for the ruthless sale, and Nathan flaunted his arrogance, I kept my gaze fixed on the envelope, the irrefutable proof that fate could not be so easily manipulated. It was time to transform that pain into strength, that injustice into redemption. Every word spoken or left unsaid, every furtive glance, only reinforced the certainty that what was rightfully mine could never be usurped. The truth had been brought to light, and the betrayal, so well orchestrated by my parents, was about to disintegrate before the unwavering force of a love that would never be for sale. As the atmosphere filled with an almost tangible energy, I realized that the battle ahead was not just against the sale of a property, but against an entire history of disloyalty and ingratitude. And in that decisive moment, the fate of our family was irrevocably sealed. The silence that fell over the room after the revelation was so deep it seemed to swallow every sigh, every tremor in the air. My parents were frozen, their eyes wide and mouths agape, while the envelope, the original deed of the house, rested in the center of the table like the final piece of a chess game whose strategy was already set. The atmosphere had transformed into a silent battlefield where every gesture, every word, carried the weight of an irreversible decision. My mother was the first to break the silence, her voice trembling and laden with disbelief. "Chloe, what is this?" I crossed my arms and with a calm that hid the inner storm replied, "The original deed of the house. In my name." My father's eyes sparkled for a brief moment before turning into a mask of contained horror. He took the envelope with trembling fingers, as if touching that document could alter the fate they had already designed. By tearing open the flap, he pulled out the papers and read them quickly, the strokes of his handwriting now transforming into an incontestable testimony of the truth. The tension was almost palpable. My mother stepped closer, her eyes brimming with incredulity, and read over his shoulder. Her lips parted in a gesture that mixed surprise with denial, yet not a single word came out. Amid the confusion, Nathan, who had until then maintained an air of arrogance, could no longer hide his shock. With a brusque gesture, he snorted and snatched the papers from our parents' hands, exclaiming with a fury that denoted the impossibility of what lay before him. "This has to be fake." Smiling, I maintained my composure and declared, "It's not. Grandfather registered this house in my name before he passed away. You were never the true owners." Incredulity filled the room. My mother shook her head vehemently, denying the reality that was imposing itself, while my father, pale and shaken, murmured something that sounded as if he were trying to reverse the inevitable. But how? The answer, however, was simple and relentless. My grandfather always knew that my parents saw the house merely as an investment, a financial asset that could be exploited without a second thought. In his final act of love and justice, he made it clear that the house belonged to me, a gesture that now undid years of betrayal and neglect. As the papers spread out over the table, the room transformed into a stage where the truth imposed itself mercilessly. The silence was broken only by the nervous sounds of heavy breathing and the incoherent words of a Nathan who, finally, was beginning to feel the weight of the consequences of his actions. My revelation was not just a documental fact. It was the reversal of a game they thought they had long since won. The sales contract, hastily signed and lacking the backing of the truth, now revealed itself as a legal artifice with no value. I was determined to reverse every decision made at my expense, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and to restore the balance that had been brutally shattered. As tempers flared, my voice remained firm and serene. You signed something that you had no right to sell. The contract is invalid. Nathan, with anger bubbling in his eyes, advanced, kicking a chair with contained fury. You can't just cancel a sale. My response was unyielding. Actually, I can. My lawyer is already handling it. Every word carried the firmness of someone who had long awaited this moment. The air seemed to vibrate with the tension of a chess game in which the final move was about to be made. Finally, our faces lit up with the realization that the truth had turned the tables. My mother, with silent tears, tried to plead. Chloe, please. We need that money. But my answer was cold and resolute. I knew that this was the moment to correct an injustice that had persisted for years. With a slow and deliberate gesture, I announced, I have already notified the buyer of the house. The sale is illegal and he has cancelled the contract, demanding a full refund. The shock in their eyes was evident. Denial gave way to the bitter understanding that they had played with the feelings and the legacy of our family, and now the game had completely turned. The tension in the room reached its peak. Every family member faced this new reality with a mixture of despair and resignation. The atmosphere, which moments earlier had been filled with a false serenity, now erupted in confusion and contained revolt. As the truth spread like an uncontrollable fire, I remained firm, aware that justice, even if delayed, was finally taking hold. Every word, every gesture, was a reminder that no one could ever usurp what rightfully belonged to the memory and legacy of my grandfather. And in that very instant the decision was made. The game had turned and the truth would be the only victor. In a blink of an eye, the mood in the room transformed from an apparent calm to an emotional storm on the verge of exploding. Still absorbing the impact of the revelation, my parents seemed dazed, while Nathan, his expression overflowing with fury, searched in vain for words to justify the disaster that had taken hold. The atmosphere, saturated with tension, allowed no more illusions. With my eyes fixed on each of them, I began to lay out the facts that had long been carefully hidden. You never took seriously the legacy that this home represents, I declared, my voice firm yet filled with contained sadness. Every brick, every memory etched in this house, is part of our history and cannot be reduced to a mere financial asset. My father, who had until then struggled to find words, finally murmured, Chloe, if we had known about this sooner, we could have resolved it differently. I laughed, a dry, humorless laugh that reflected my disbelief at their naivety. Differently? Do you really think you could have acted any other way if you had just acknowledged the truth that was always before you? My voice echoed like a hammer, each word emphasizing the moral bankruptcy hidden behind their actions. As I articulated each argument, my eyes never left the vacant stare of my mother, who, overwhelmed by a mixture of remorse and disbelief, desperately sought a trace of compassion. Unable to contain his anger, Nathan advanced with exaggerated gestures, as if he wanted to erase the evidence that was now undeniable. You did it on purpose. You kept quiet, waiting for the right moment to screw us over. My response was as cold as it was final. Funny, it seems exactly what you did to me. The accusation hung in the air, laden with a weight that surpassed the mere discussion of a property. It was the reflection of years of distrust, manipulation, and betrayal. I stood my ground, and while my parents exchanged looks of pure despair, I continued. My lawyer is already taking care of everything. Every contract, every signature. Nothing is valid if it was done without my knowledge. The words hung like an irrevocable sentence. The room, once dominated by a false sense of security, now teemed with consequences. I knew that every step taken from that moment on would determine not only the fate of the house but also the future of the entire family. Amid this whirlwind of emotions, my mind revisited memories of my grandfather. I recalled his words filled with wisdom, his look that said more than 1,000 speeches, the look of someone who knew that justice, even if delayed, would always find a way to prevail. My mother, with tears held back and her voice choked, tried in one last effort to appeal to the humanity that still remained in her. Chloe, we are your family. Please think about what you are doing. But I, already irreversibly transformed by the bitterness of so many betrayals, replied firmly. You did this to me first. I cannot and I will not accept another injustice. Every word from me was a brick in the reconstruction of a legacy that had long been threatened. While Nathan flailed his fists and my father sought refuge in the armchair, I felt the strength of a past that refused to be forgotten. In a calculated move, I announced the final card of my counterattack. I have already notified the buyer of the house. He cancelled the contract and is demanding a refund. You will have to bear the consequences of your choices. The silence that followed was absolute. The faces, once full of arrogance and contempt, now reflected the despair of knowing that nothing could reverse the inevitable. It was the moment when justice, long delayed, finally imposed itself. While Nathan's anger transformed into pure desperation, and my parents unsuccessfully searched for excuses to deny the truth, I felt the weight of the responsibility to preserve not just a property, but an entire history of love, sacrifice, and memory. Bathed in the soft light of an evening that heralded the end of a cycle, the room became the stage on which the counterattack was solidified. And at that very moment, I understood that the true value of a home was not measured in figures or contracts. It was rooted in the stories it housed and in the dignity of those who fought for it. When I realized that the faces around me were no longer those of my parents and brother, but rather those of people lost in a sea of regret and resignation, I knew that the final move had been made. The atmosphere, once laden with tension and refusal, had transformed into a scene of an announced defeat. My mother, her eyes brimming with tears and her voice choked, tried in one last gasp of hope to appeal to my compassion. "Chloe, we are your family. You can't do this to us." But with a cold, resolute smile I replied, "You did this to me first." The room seemed to vibrate with the weight of those words. Every gesture, every sigh, was the reflection of years of betrayal and ingratitude. My gaze fixed on Nathan, who now trembled with helplessness, and on my father, whose once proud posture yielded to an irreversible collapse. The truth, represented by the original deed, the legacy of my grandfather, rested silent and infallible on the table as I, with the dignity of one who had nothing left to lose, delivered the checkmate. In a calm voice I announced, "I have already notified the buyer of the house. The contract has been annulled and he is suing you for real estate fraud." The shock was instantaneous. Nathan, whose fury had now transformed into pure despair, could not form a single word, while my father, stunned, remained motionless, as if the full weight of his choices had finally descended upon him. My mother, between tears and pleas, tried once more. "Chloe, please, think about what you are doing." But I knew there was no turning back. Every action taken by them, every attempt to manipulate me, had paved the way for this moment. Regaining my voice, firm and unyielding, I declared, "I have officially registered the house in my name. You will never be able to take it away from me again." Those words echoed through the room, marking the end of an era of disloyalty and the certainty that, finally, justice prevailed. The atmosphere, which until then had been dominated by false hopes and malicious plans, was now reduced to the bitter realization that no one could escape the consequences of their actions. Nathan, with his fists clenched, tried to argue. "But the money has already been spent. I made investments, I have obligations. How am I supposed to reverse this now?" My response was cold and without remorse. "That's your problem. Every choice has its price." The ensuing silence was almost deafening. My mother, clutching my father's arm as if seeking refuge, looked at me with a mixture of pain and resignation. And I, observing every expression, felt that somehow I had finally restored the balance that had long been stolen from me. As the light of dusk merged with the shadows of the night, I realized that this was not merely a personal victory. It was the checkmate of a game that had transcended the dispute over material possessions. It was the reaffirmation of the right to preserve the memory and the love that home harbored. A few weeks passed since that fateful day, and the change was felt irrevocably. My lawyer finalized the legal proceedings, and the buyer of the house moved forward with a lawsuit that would force my parents and Nathan to bear the consequences of their choices. The house, which had long been treated as a profit-making object, was now once again the sacred symbol of our roots. On a quiet morning, I received a call from my mother. Hearing the tired, almost pleading tone, I hesitated for a brief moment before answering. "Chloe, you won, all right? Now you can stop with all this," she said, her voice choked with resignation. I looked at the envelope that had been the key to everything and with a sad smile replied, This isn't about winning or losing, Mom. It's a matter of justice. As I hung up, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. I walked through the corridors of the house, where every corner held a memory, and I knew that finally that home belonged to me, not just as a material asset, but as a legacy that would never be forgotten. They tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I was the one who took everything from them. What did you think of this story of revenge and justice? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and tell me which moment was your favorite. Would you have done something differently? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and don't miss any of our stories full of twists and impactful endings.